Hello, it's Nick from the podcast. I'm here up front, and that can only mean one thing. I've got another comics Kickstarter going. This is the new one for Death of a Necromancer, my fun goth Tim Burton-esque graphic novel about the rise of dark magic in a small English town. There'll be more about this at the end of the episode, but if you want to get involved right now, then you should be able to find the link in the show notes. Anyway, I won't hold you back any longer. Here is this fortnight's hot new moderate fantasy violence episode. Enjoy.
Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be embodying the spirit of vengeance in The Batman and engaging in some hardcore drugs, sex, and abusive psychological manipulation in Euphoria Season 2. But before this trip to the darker side of the human nature, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Well, slightly cuddlier and less hardcore, I'm going to talk about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 7, which I have finally watched after, I think, 2 years. So yeah, much less hardcore and much less up-to-date. This is, of course, the last season of Marvel's first, I think, live-action TV spin-off from the MCU. A show which seemed for about half a season like it might be really zeitgeisty and successful, but quickly departed the zeitgeist by, I think, about the middle of Season 2, to be honest. But impressively, did keep going all the way to its 7th year, and much like Legends of Tomorrow on the DC side, did actually become quite good and fun eventually, after a few years, once almost everybody had stopped watching it. I think they just started to enjoy stretching out and playing with whatever genre they can, because obviously in the Marvel universe, both comic and cinematic, they've basically just mushed all genres together in a big pile, so they can do whatever they want, which means Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. can do a storyline about magic, going straight into a story about robots, going straight into a story about going into space, going straight into a story about time travel. So yeah, I enjoyed the level of fun genre mixing they indulged in, and the characters did eventually settle down and become quite fun once they got out of the sort of staid secret agent phase. So it's a fun show. It's a hard one to recommend because it never quite rises above being a fun genre show, and the first 2, maybe 3 seasons are a bit hard going. But nonetheless, as someone who did stick with it, it was a fun run. I'll miss it in a small way, even though it took me 2 years to watch the last season.
Is it that it took some time to find its own identity or what it was trying to do, and then once it found that's when it gets good?
Something like that, yeah. I think it spent most of seasons 2 and 3, and I think a lot of season 1 as well, setting up a storyline involving the Inhumans, which was, I think, a bit of a Marvel corporate mandate. I don't know how much exciting corporate backstory we want in this segment, but there was a period where Marvel were trying to big up the Inhumans as a sort of in-house replacement for the X-Men, who they didn't have the rights to at the time. Then, of course, it became clear that Marvel was going to absorb Fox and get the rights back to the X-Men, at which point the Inhumans were cast aside like garbage. And they immediately stopped talking about them in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and it immediately became a much better show.
Ah, right. So it's always interesting to find out the behind-the-scenes decisions that influence things. So the plot lines that they followed, are they sort of taken broadly from Marvel comic lore, or do they kind of have their own stories and their own characters?
Mostly their own, in a similar way to some of the Marvel films. They have taken concepts from them. Like entertainingly, there was a long storyline in season 4 which introduced a new incarnation of the Ghost Rider, the flaming skullhead man, most famously played by Nicolas Cage in a movie. And I think they've introduced a couple of other mild Marvel concepts, but a lot of the time it's just been genre stuff they've introduced and nailed onto Marvel concepts. I think they had a long storyline involving the Kree, who are technically a Marvel alien species from the comics in season 5.
Aren't they in Captain Marvel?
Yeah, I think possibly that was meant to be a very vague tie-in to Captain Marvel, yeah. There was a brief period where they were sort of trying to tie into the films in spirit, like they did a Ghost Rider storyline around the same time Doctor Strange came out, because I guess it's both magic stuff. And they did a Kree storyline at a similar-ish time to when Captain Marvel came out. It's a sort of weird tie-in, but not tie-in. Tied to these films without ever mentioning their name.
People on the internet were pointing out that they missed the point to make Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. sort of part of the official MCU, or more officially, in Loki, when they showed Coulson's death, but didn't show that he actually survived in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
I don't know what the official Marvel line on this is, and I suspect they are very specifically avoiding taking a line if they can. But I would suspect that in the official cinematic universe chronology, Coulson just died in Avengers and stayed dead, and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is some sort of rogue timeline, which they will bring back if they ever feel it serves them usefully. I feel like they're leaving these things vague serves them more than addressing them, in a similar way to all that Netflix Marvel Defenderverse stuff.
Yeah, but so you would recommend sticking with it for the people who've enjoyed it so far?
It's one of those things where, yeah, if you manage to make it through seasons 2 or so, then yeah, especially from season 4 onwards, it's pretty good. It's pretty fun. The characters chill out a bit and start to get a nice sort of found family vibe going on. It becomes a bit less of a workplace show and more a show about these, because obviously S.H.I.E.L.D. is destroyed in The Winter Soldier, and which is around the end of S.H.I.E.L.D. season 1. Yeah, eventually a nice sort of werewolf that we've got, where sort of one group hanging out together, found family vibe develops, and it's quite nice and quite fun, and you do actually get to quite like them all, and they introduce some new fun characters. As I say, very little stuff from the comics, but yeah, it's a good laugh. It's not as good as Legends of Tomorrow, I should stress. They have a similar trajectory, but Legends of Tomorrow just does it better. Yeah, a lot of gentle affection for Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Although I'm not going to launch a Save Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. campaign. 7 seasons. They had a good run, guys. Let them rest.
I mean, that is a good run. I mean, there aren't many shows that get to 7 seasons.
Exactly, and there are even fewer shows who go beyond 7 seasons and stay good, so...
Yes, that is also true. I mean, there must have been people enjoying it. It must have had a following. They didn't make 7 seasons of it just for laughs.
I think it must have a certain cult following, yeah. It's, especially in the UK for some reason. It did often feel like I was basically the only person watching it. One or two times I tweeted jokes along those lines, and a couple of British people I know replied saying, no, I'm still watching it. But it seems pretty niche. But yeah, for whatever it's worth, all 7 seasons have been up on Disney Plus for a while, so if you want to watch it, it's quite easy to get hold of now. Entertainingly, in the last season, they tied back to Agent Carter, because they were doing some time travel, so they met one of the characters from the Agent Carter show, which was quite fun.
Oh, sounds good.
So there we go, there's your Marvel trivia, getting about to entice anyone into watching it. Anyway, Alistair, what have you been consuming?
Well, I've also been watching a show on Disney Plus. It's a brand new show, starting the last couple of weeks. It's The Dropout, starring Amanda Siegfried. This is a drama based on the real-life story of Elizabeth Holmes, who founded the medical biotech startup Theranos, which was a company that became worth billions, a hot ticket startup. Elizabeth Holmes became America's youngest self-made female billionaire, and then it was ultimately discovered that they had defrauded investors. The whole thing collapsed. The show is about, what drives someone to be so successful and really motivates people to achieve, but then what makes that motivation turn dark to the point that they start crossing moral lines and ultimately crossing criminal lines as well. And it's kind of about that startup culture, that emphasis on, success and, being seen to be successful and being a big deal and creating buzz and changing the world, huge amounts of money, all that kind of tech optimism stuff. But then the fact that there can be a real dark side to the startup scene. And especially also it's a kind of about how much pressure there is on women to succeed. So yeah, there's a lot going on there, but it is really entertaining.
You say entertaining, is it taking this stuff to the point of silliness like Silicon Valley did, or is it a bit more of an actual drama?
It's much more of a drama than Silicon Valley, obviously, but it does have its humorous moments. The machine they're trying to make and sell does blood tests, and they finally get it to perform a blood test for sepsis, and then they start going, yes, we have sepsis, and everyone starts dancing and chanting, we have sepsis, which is very funny. So it's got these darkly comic moments, but it's primarily a drama, but there are lots of things about the kind of absurdity of the tech scene, the weirdness and craziness of tech bros. So yeah, I guess it's got its moments, it's got its funny moments.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen this pushed to me on Disney Plus a lot, and it did look like it could be fun. Amanda Seyfried's normally reliable.
Yeah, no, she's absolutely excellent as the core of this show. She's in almost every scene. She's really, I think, nailed, the performance of Elizabeth Holmes, this kind of dead-eyed, three-quarter stare that she seems to have the whole time. The sort of combination of manic energy, slight nervousness. At the beginning, she looks like she has this sort of rabbit caught in the headlights look as the world comes screaming at her. Later on, she kind of just looks like someone who's dead inside. So yeah, it is a great performance, and she is kind of the core of the show.
So is this running through her entire life, just like a limited miniseries thing, rather than a forever ongoing series?
Yeah, it's a limited miniseries as far as I can tell, and yeah, it starts with her. I think the first sort of scenes are her childhood, but it starts with her going to Stanford, going to university, and then she drops out, which is part of it, because so many of the great tech founders, like Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, the people who founded Google, sort of dropped out of uni. So she drops out, she starts her company. So it kind of charts her life. The sort of framing device they use is her giving a court deposition later on, which it kind of cuts to as a sort of way to, structure the thing and kind of deliver the facts in lieu of a voiceover or anything like that.
Okay. Yeah, no, sounds good.
Yeah, it seems to be getting some buzz. It's certainly interesting. There's a lot of shows right now focusing on the dark side of tech, you can imagine, with the world being what it is and tech startups having at least some role in shaping it. I know there's obviously, well, I mean, we've had Silicon Valley that you mentioned. There was The Social Network a few years ago. There's one about Uber. There's one about WeWork coming out.
Black Mirror, although ironically, as this becomes more and more relevant to everyone else, Black Mirror seems to have dropped off.
Yeah, I think the more the world becomes like Black Mirror, the less, I guess, Black Mirror has its ability to shock or be satirically biting. Similar to the same reason why they stopped making the thick of it.
Yeah, that's glum, isn't it? Charlie Brooker stops making Black Mirror because the world is just too Black Mirror for him to continue. Oh,
yeah.
well.
That's a sobering thought. The other thing is about this show is that because it's set in the aughts in the 2010s, there's a lot of nostalgia for them, like old iPods and Missy Elliott and Amy Winehouse on the soundtrack, which is kind of weird that, like, yeah, my late teenage years and uni experience is now sort of being cashed in for nostalgia, which is a also disturbing experience.
Yeah, no, I've seen this, because, like, obviously a lot of stuff I grew up on from the 90s has been done in the last 5 years or so, 5-10 years. Nostalgia is moving on to the 2000s, isn't it? It's strange, because that's stuff that, if anything, I was kind of ignoring when I was at university.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of things recently, the Dropout being the most notable one, but yeah, who are sort of things that are setting themselves in the sort of the late 90s and early aughts and doing it very much as the past, in inverted commas, which you can't see because this is a podcast. Yeah, and now it's getting to the point that, like, stuff from my adulthood is being done as historical fiction. It's slightly alarming, yeah.
But to be fair, we weren't that old when we were having The Social Network done as historical fiction, which was alarmingly recent at the time.
Yeah. I managed to reassure myself that at least that was mainly set before I went to university. But now they're doing, like, nostalgia for post-university bits. There's a scene in The Dropout when Elizabeth Holmes is amongst the first people to buy the iPhone when the first iPhone launched. And it's like, oof, that's 2008. That's not the past. I refuse to accept 2008 is that long ago.
Well, you know, the people who were born after the year 2000 are now finishing university, so...
Yeah. Nostalgia for for when they were, like, 4 is becoming a thing.
Do you think they're sitting and watching these things and thinking, I remember being 4?
I don't know. I guess they are kind of relating to that I relate to things that are set in the late 80s. You know, so I have a vague memory of, you know, the fall of the Berlin Wall. I know that was 1989, yeah. I have a vague memory of the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Well, you were a much more aware child than me. I think my first childhood memory of a major world event might have been Princess Diana dying, possibly?
I do remember that, yeah.
That might be the first time that the real world really broke into my childhood reverie of endless books, comics, and Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yeah, and there's a film about Princess Diana's life out right now.
Yeah.
As well, Spencer, again, sort of nostalgia trip down memory lane to 1997, yeah. Well, it covers her whole life, I think, as well as her death.
Well, fine.
So, yeah, our lives are now on the nostalgia chopping block.
But hey, at least this TV show's apparently good.
Yeah, no, I'd recommend it.
Jesus Christ.
All right,
well,
on that note,
walked ourselves slowly into the darkness, it's time for Batman.
Yeah. This is just episode is just going to get darker from this point onwards. I think Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is the sunny upland part of this episode, as the Dropout is a bit darker, and now it's just going to get darker and darker with the Batman and then Euphoria.
But never mind, there'll be a small glimmer of light at the end when it ends. Okay, and first up in our journey into the darkness, we've got The Batman, the latest cinematic incarnation of The Dark Knight, this time played by Robert Pattinson and directed by Matt Reeves, bringing with them Zoe Kravitz as Catwoman, Paul Dano as the Riddler, Jeffrey Wright as Commissioner Gordon, and many other people in many other parts. The story this time involves Paul Dano's Riddler embarking on a grisly, heavily tape-involving killing spree, leaving mysterious clues for the Batman, who at this point is in the second year of his career, just starting to really get a foothold on Gotham's crime. And now Bruce Wayne, a grim, gothy, early 20-something, must discover the truth behind the Riddler's vendetta, which may well go to the very heart of his own life as Bruce Wayne, and the very structure of Gotham himself. It's a 3-hour, dark, conspiracy mystery Batman film. Alistair, did we like it?
Well, on the surface, this Batman film appeals very similar to the Christopher Nolan Batman films. You know, it's another dark and gritty Batman, which is a massive improvement on whatever it is that Snyder was trying to do. I guess he was trying to do dark and gritty as well, but it sort of seemed to completely go off the rails at some point. So, you know, if you were burned by previous Zack Snyder Batman films as we were, this is definitely a big improvement. And as I watched it and sort of thought about it, it's kind of, I think, a bit too obvious to say that it's really similar to the Nolan Batman movies. It does have its own identity. I think in some ways this is more of a synthesis of the Burton Batmans and the Nolan Batmans. It's dark and gritty, but it's got a slightly more fantastical edge to it. It's got some of the odder villains. You mentioned the Riddler in the intro, the Penguin's also in this. Gotham has this more sort of fantastical gothic feel. So I actually kind of really got into this movie on its own terms, which was something that I was surprised by, but I can actually strongly recommend it on those grounds.
Yeah, and from my perspective, as someone who has read in his life many Batman-related comics, even though Batman isn't, my primary superheroic entry point, that's actually Spider-Man, but you just can't really get away from Batman in superhero comics. This is definitely the most Batman comic-y Batman film. There's a real sense of the comic book city, the sort of casual sense of, oh look, there's a club run by the Penguin, there's a guy running around killing people and everyone's kind of acting like it's just a thing that happens. Batman's just casually wandering around having a chat with the cops, which was the sort of thing that you see all the time in the comics, but never quite realise how odd it is until someone acts it out in real life with Robert Pattinson. Yeah, there's a very real sense of the comics here, which I think both Burton and Nolan went away from a bit. Burton by making it more his own personal gothy style, gothy fairy tale, whatever it is he does, and Nolan by making it a bit more action cinema, I think. Nolan seemed to feel it was his duty to add in some stuff where you fight a big doomsday device. The only film where he didn't really go for that was The Dark Knight, and is it a coincidence that that's the best one? I think not. As a result, yeah, there's definitely the most Batman-y Batman film here. It takes Batman seriously without making him boringly indestructible and going on about some sort of abstract concepts, which might be a subtweet of the Zack Snyder films. It lets him have his crusade and, just accepts that this is Batman. He's, the spirit of vengeance that lives in the shadows in Gotham. There's a lot of good shots of criminals looking nervously at the shadows, like, oh god, is Batman there? Which is, very much, I think, what he wants in a sort of classic Batman incarnation, this idea that he's this guy who could be everywhere, lurching out of the shadows to bash you in at any moment. But, it lets Batman be that, which is, what the nerds want. It's what we all want. But also asks a few interesting questions about his perspective, his privilege, to make it at least seem a bit like a film made in 2022. But without digging too far into the eternally tedious, played-out hot take of why doesn't he just give his money to charity. So yeah, no, I enjoyed this film. I do kind of agree with the people who say it's a bit too long. By the time we'd had 3 hours of this, I was very ready for it to end. I was like, you could have made 2 films with this amount of runtime. Honestly, sometimes it felt a bit like I was binging some kind of miniseries. But yeah, length aside, yes, it's definitely the most Batman-y Batman film. So 5 out of 5 Batmans.
It is long, you are right. And I think also crucially, it feels long, unlike recent films that are shorter but also quite long, like Dune or No Time to Die. They didn't feel like their 2 hour 40 runtime. This is slow paced at times. I mean, it's got obviously action scenes, which I'm sure we'll come to, but the pacing is deliberately slow, which on some level I kind of liked because it didn't feel the need to rush like a roller coaster and keep you constantly entertained by having, something explode every 5 seconds. And it had the self-confidence to luxuriate in its tone and its feel and go deep and, move quite slowly, which, the fact they felt confident enough to do that, maybe because they think, oh, it's Batman, people love this stuff, they'll pay to see it anyway, or maybe because they felt that no, we really want to create this strong mood, and there's a real sort of strong, sense of both place and gothic menace running through the film. So they take the time to do that. So even though it was long, I did feel that in some ways it was justified, although to be honest, I did have quite a numb bum by the end and didn't stay to the end of the credits.
Well, yeah, helped by the fact that I googled it in my cinema seat during the credits, and there wasn't a relevant or particularly exciting post-credit scene, so we just buggered off. But yeah, the length, it's annoying because there's no particular sequence which I think that was bad or that was filler, but I just feel like the film as a whole just didn't need to be that long. It was an annoying situation wherein, yes, it's a good film, well made, and it's got a very nice sort of, as you say, deliberate, meticulous pace. Like a lot of the time, comic fans go and see comic films and they get annoyed because they're not being given enough time to, see the characters interact or see that person's reaction to that thing or have that specific self-indulgent moment because the film's too busy doing its big action scene, capturing the key emotional high points and then moving on. Whereas the Batman does go through itself somewhat meticulously, like the great detective Batman himself. And that's good, but that also makes it very, very long.
Yeah, that is true. It's interesting that you mentioned, that Batman is actually supposed to be like a detective. And one of the things I did really like about this film is that it's actually a mystery film. There is a mystery that Batman is investigating and uncovering. He's working with the police. DC stands for Detective Comics. This is the first time in quite a long time there's really been a mystery in the Batman movie, not just it's Batman against one of his villains like Crusades of Terror.
Yeah, and I quite liked also that this is meant to be a not, completely novice Batman, but a fairly early career Batman. And he's allowed to, make a few obvious mistakes. Like there's a whole sequence where they just go completely down the wrong road on a mystery because of their bad Spanish or their failure to grasp the nuances of Spanish, which was, quite good. I mean, Batman still gets to look awesome and have a mighty car chase whilst doing this pointless diversion. But still, it's quite nice to see Batman, fuck up in a relatable way.
Yeah, but I was intrigued by the mystery, and I was definitely watching thinking, I want to know what the solution to this mystery is and who's ultimately responsible for it. I mean, I'm dancing around saying anything that would spoil it for the people who've not seen the film, but there's a sort of a conspiracy that the Riddler is sort of exposing through his various murders and kidnappings, and Batman is also trying to investigate, partly to find out who the Riddler's going to get next.
And the mystery, it kind of goes back to Batman himself and to the wider world of Gotham in an interesting way that doesn't feel like they're messing around for the sake of it. It does actually challenge Batman in an interesting way. I was down with that conspiracy. It made me want to see more of it, to be honest. I always like the idea of this film as a jumping off point for future films, which is annoying because now I had to wait for them to film them, and if they're all this long, it's going to take ages. This almost brings me back to my hot take that they should do more superheroes as TV shows so that you can just get on with the episodic nature of the story, but hardly anyone seems to want to spend that much money on superhero TV. When they do, it only makes 6 episodes every 2 years.
I guess the most famous superhero movies are reserved for the cinema. Batman, Spider-Man, Iron Man, etc. I guess still cinema has this sort of sense of prestige. The same reason why, James Bond is like, we go straight to the cinema.
Well, yeah, but James Bond stuff tends to be more self-contained. But yeah, anyway. I also like, speaking of the Riddler, the way he's used a bit to satirise sort of right-wing arsehole streamers. His weird streaming channel and his banky followers replying to him. I mean, on some level it's a bit straightforward, but the film doesn't really have the time or the interest to go into the nuance of streamer culture, but it does use it in a way that seems at least broadly plausible and doesn't seem like someone who's never actually used the internet.
It's a knowing nod to people who are in the know, but it's not something essential for you to understand the film. But there is definitely an element also of the Riddler is a sort of, conspiracy nut or someone who's disappeared down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, although there is a line which I've seen getting lightly roasted on Twitter where someone says in a shocked voice, the Riddler's got 500 followers. It's like, dude, I've got 1,800 followers. Can I take out a city? Can I take out 3 cities?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, I forgot about that. And it is like, you'd like to think someone who wrote that had been on Twitter or something like that.
I mean, I guess the point is, if you've got 500 followers who are in your, private channel and they're all, dedicated and heavily armed and willing to kill, that's probably still a decent number.
As they say in the social media world, it's about quality of followers, not quantity.
Yeah, you need your 500 true fans who are willing to take up arms and attack a stadium.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Any volunteers to join the MFV army? And
we're finally going to start the MFV Patreon now that we finally found a cause worth raising money for.
Yeah.
Anyway. Speaking of the Riddler, aside from his middling social media following, Paul Dano's really good. It's an interesting portrayal of insanity. It does possibly run into the issue that a lot of Batman's villains just aren't that good in a fight, but still, he does give a very good performance, especially during the scenes towards the end when he gets to go full mask off. It's very entertaining.
Yeah, he was very creepy and quite scary in this film, and they made the Riddler actually a very scary presence, considering a lot of people last saw the Riddler in the Joel Schumacher Batman Forever, played by Jim Carrey. It's a character that's hard to take seriously. I don't know to what degree they've altered him from the comics, but in this they've kind of basically turned him into a serial killer. Somewhere between the Zodiac killer and, again, someone who's disappeared down a sort of QAnon rabbit hole, mad internet streamer person. But it is certainly scary.
It's a bit of a departure from the comics. The comics tend to either be similar to the Jim Carrey one, or in the more low-key comics, they play him as this sort of conspiracy detective guy, I think. In recent comics, he's been a sort of weird detective who's occasionally at odds with Batman, but in a sort of morally ambiguous way. Like, the Riddler isn't really played as a terrifying nemesis anymore. Here, the Batman sort of coexist, and sometimes they're at each other's throats, and sometimes they're sort of awkwardly on the same side. So yeah, this is a bit more of an aggressively scary, malignant version of the Riddler than we've seen in recent comics.
I liked how they did keep consistently the colour green as his main colour, but in this they have it more that he wears kind of a green army fatigues, has a sort of a green gas mask which he wears to hide his identity, and ties his victim up in sort of green duct tape.
It's one of those redesigns which is a nice shout out. I mean, part of me does wonder if we're going to get to some of the more visually iconic characters. I mean, they did do a not unfaithful version of Catwoman, to be fair. Catwoman did wear something approximating the Catwoman costume. So it's not as if they went away from that shit entirely.
And they had Colin Farrell playing the Penguin, and I thought he was excellent. And yeah, he had a suit, and at one point he did the kind of the Penguin walk. And yeah, his suit is very much, white shirt, sort of long kind of black jacket thing that gives him a sort of distinctly penguin-like profile.
Yeah, no, he was good. He was a kind of side presence in a I'm in this for future sequels way, or possibly some sort of spin-off TV miniseries based on what I've been seeing in the geek webosphere. But either way, he felt like he was there so he could come back. And Zoe Kravitz, I thought, was pretty great as Catwoman. Honestly, she might be the standout single performance in this film for me. And although there are a lot of good performances, and Robert Pattinson, who we should probably talk about at some point, is also very good. But I thought Zoe Kravitz was especially good and stole most of her scenes.
Yeah, no, I thought she was excellent. Yeah, especially as probably the breakout star of this, the person with the lowest profile, but probably did the best. She was excellent. I mean, the cast is enormous. Jeffrey Wright was great as the Commissioner Gordon character. John Turturro playing a mob boss was someone that I especially enjoyed. He's very good. I'd like him in a lot of his stuff, especially his work with the Coen brothers. He's always excellent. But yeah, and obviously Robert Pattinson did a great Batman. He does dark and moody very well, and this is a dark and moody film. And he had something of the sort of tragic gothic figure to him, in his giant gothic mansion. He really embodied the sort of feel of Batman more so than certainly anyone since, I don't know, anyone ever. I mean, like... Christian Bale was good as Batman, but I always felt the best bits of Christian Bale was when he was doing Bruce Wayne, and especially he was kind of showed of his acting the most when he was playing Bruce Wayne, when Bruce Wayne was playing up to being an idiot playboy, which was obviously to mask the fact that he's, obviously actually the Caped Crusader and a sort of serious, intelligent person, but he has to play dumb in public. And that's kind of when Christian Bale, you can see, was having the most fun, playing a character. And obviously he was good in the sort of Batman scenes, but it was a lot of just putting on a mask and doing a gravelly voice, whereas, I don't know, Robert Pattinson has the brooding presence you want if you're going to go full dark and gritty Batman.
Well, yeah, but a lot of past Batman portrayals have shied away from the slightly less glamorous, less awesome, more slightly creepy and pathetic angle of he's just a man who lives in a cave. He's just a very lonely, sad man who sits in a cave below his house being lonely and sad. And although Robert Pattinson isn't going full weird, like I think some people were hoping this would be a flat-out odd performance, and it's not a flat-out odd performance. It's in a lot of ways a fairly straight Batman performance, but some of the scenes in which he's, just sort of skulking in the cave looking at evidence, and he genuinely seems just like a strange man who lives in a cave, are actually quite interesting. It's a take on Batman that hasn't quite been done before.
Yeah, and I think Pattinson's got the presence to do it, and he is a very interesting and talented actor. He chooses great projects. I mean, one of the recent things that he did or in the sort of pre-pandemic world was The Lighthouse, which was a really out there, unusual film, but a great performance, a really unusual, artistically interesting project that he did. So, he's got a lot of chops, and he's got a lot of kudos for taking on interesting and unusual projects. And, he sent up his kind of pretty boy persona in The King, which was, again, that was an interesting project to do. So he's doing interesting stuff with the Batman.
I mean, I think he's long ago got past the he's just a guy from Twilight thing, but yeah, he's good here, and it's interesting to see him in mainstream cinema again. I don't know to what extent he's just doing it because he needs to give his profile a shot so he can keep making his weird movies, but for whatever reason he's doing it. It's pretty good.
I can imagine most actors will take Batman if they're offered. It's kind of a dream part, I guess, especially if you can put your own slant on it. But also, this incarnation of the character in some ways felt more true to Batman than whatever it was that Snyder was trying to do. In that, there are several bits in the film when Batman, saves people, people in danger he saves, in that he's a hero or a superhero, whatever you want to call it. And, he's there to save people who can't save themselves, which he actually does. And I think that some recent versions of Batman have lost touch with the essence of the character. Like, he solves and fights crime. He saves people. He doesn't sort of have long, broody meditations on the nature of a hero or things like that. The essence of the character is solves crime, fights crime, saves people.
Well, yeah, but again, that's what I think makes this film appealing to, fans of the comics or whatever. It's the sense that this is, Batman doing his regular Batman business, just Batmaning around, without too many attempts to flag it up and make it cinematic, or without too much, as you say, long, abstract ponderings, there's no mention of the soul of the city, hardly at all. Yeah, I think this is strong, solid Batman. Occasionally I did think, especially as I was getting towards the end of the 3 hours, it's not the most adventurous Batman film ever. If anything, Christopher Nolan was probably doing more, air quotes, interesting things with it at times, whereas this is, in some ways, standard meat and potatoes Batman, albeit very, very, very well made.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Christopher Nolan was then, and certainly has become since, a sort of auteur director, a man with his own sort of vision and puts his stamp on his films. And you hire Christopher Nolan to make a Christopher Nolan film. And I think as a lot of people pointed out, I think, including you yourself, that Christopher Nolan turned Batman into a Christopher Nolan film. And I guess this is going back to Batman, let Batman be Batman, to paraphrase The West Wing.
Well, yeah, I mean, all the three previous directors, to be honest, played Batman filtered through their personal style, and it might just be because Matt Reeves is a director whose personal style I'm not that familiar with. I think he do the new Planet of the Apes trilogy a few years back? Was that him?
I mean, yeah, he does sort of stylish, dark genre films. It seems to be his thing, which is what was delivered here.
But yeah, at the same time, it's just very good at what it does. So even if I could mention that what it does isn't necessarily super exciting, adventurous, or, as you say, autorial, probably not a word. Yeah, it's incredibly good at what it's doing, the solid Batmaning. Okay, and last up on today's Sadness special, it's Euphoria Season 2. This is, of course, the second season of the Kids Are All Doomed HBO drama, written and created by Sam Levinson, apparently based on the Israeli TV show of the same name, and this follows a group of teens through their experiences of drugs, nudes, and generally living a doomed-seeming life in the modern world. This, of course, centres around Zendaya's character Rue, who is battling with drug addiction, accompanied by her love interest Jules, her friends Cassie, Maddie and others, and a whole range of random teenagers. The first season was a few years ago now. We've also seen the specials that were on since, and now we've seen the second one. Alistair, what did you think?
Well, it would be easy to have a moral panic about this show that's about kids doing drugs and fucking and hating life. You could see almost the hot takes about, is this what youth have become, sort of right itself? Which is ironic because young people today are doing less drugs and having less sex than young people in the past. I think one thing to take away from this show is it's not, I think, a realistic depiction of what it's like to be an American teenager. I mean, I'm sure there are communities, places like this, you could find people who are this fucked up and this narcissistic and this generally awful. But I think this show is best enjoyed as more like a dark fantasy about the kind of unpleasant things that kind of lurk beneath the surface in American life. It's more like a sort of David Lynch nightmare than Mike Leigh bit of social realism. It might be socialist on some level, who knows. But yeah, I think it's best enjoyed as a dark fantasy, and on that level it really works. I mean, there's some incredibly tense episodes, very dramatic bits. There's strong characterization. It's very moving. So on that level, I did really enjoy this show.
I had a weird journey watching this. I started off finding it slightly trudgy and hard going. There's a certain amount of hedonistic party scenes shot like a music video which start to wash over you, and by episode 4 there had been quite a few of them. But then at some point, I think around the point of episode 5, where they kind of ditch their normal format and just have a sort of long continuous episode which focuses in on one very long, very bad night in Rue, the Zendaya character's life, as she really hits rock bottom on her drug use. And after that I was kind of into it. I don't know whether that episode just really snaps me into focus, or if it's just the fact that after that everyone seems to focus a bit more on their trauma and a bit less on their hedonistic partying. But yeah, the general level of sadness in the second half of the show very much worked for me. Well, it's not all sadness, to be fair. I think if anything, Rue kind of hits rock bottom in that episode and then starts working her way up to an almost redemptive place in the episodes after that. But yeah, I remember quite enjoying season 1. It's, as you say, it's weird dark fantasy high school stuff, but my level of interest in the high school storylines kind of dropped off this year, which I felt like the show did a bit as well. I felt like they were a bit more moving towards the drugs crime stuff, but to be honest, the more they did that stuff, the more I liked it, so fair enough.
There's definitely more emphasis on the kind of the crime side. There's more about Fezco, the ruse dealer. It's got a bigger storyline. I mean, he's the first character to appear and one of the last characters to appear in the show, or in the second series. And I did think that episode was amazing. The 5th episode, it was very tense, very dramatic. And then after that, there was a kind of series of really explosive episodes. There was Rue's recovery, was very sad and moving. And then there's the 2-part finale about the play that Lexi's written that was really quite innovative in the way that it kind of mixed the characters watching a play about their lives and then the scenes that the play is kind of based on being played out, and it moved back and forth. It really did show off how, I guess, creative and visually interesting Sam Levinson is as a director, that he kind of mixed theatre and film together in this way.
Yeah, though I thought the 2-part finale was, I'm not going to say the highlight, because I think you're right, the highlight was episode 5 with Zendaya's long dark night on drugs. But the 2-part finale combined with that was what I think settled this for me as being a largely successful season of TV, even if I was a bit in and out of it in the first half. I thought that was pretty excellent. I think they were vaguely building us to expect that to be the part where Lexi reveals herself to be just as awful as the people she's complaining about, just in a slightly more judgmental way. And although that did kind of happen, it wasn't quite that straightforward. It's also possible to be on Lexi's side, or at least to see her point, whilst also acknowledging that some of this is just her being bitter.
It's quite a nuanced show, which I liked about it, and the characters are quite complexly drawn. And on some level, Lexi's the most sympathetic character in that she's less of a narcissist. She's not a drug addict who hurts everyone who gets near her.
She put on a play about herself for her lack of narcissism.
I mean, they are pretty narcissistic cast. I'm possibly biased because, like, Lexi's the character I identify with the most, the one who's the writer, who is always on the fringes, kind of observing things and saving them for her writing. So, I mean, it's probably slightly a biased take that I found Lexi the most relatable and least unpleasant of the characters. But at the same time, the show does say that, like, on some level, she's just judging everyone and her vice is feeling superior, whereas others it's sex, drugs, or hating people. But at the same time, it shows that there's sort of, she's very sad, she's gone through a lot of trauma, but also the way she processes and her trauma helps other people, especially Rue, sort of climb out of the dark pit that she's fallen into. So each character, although awful, has something nice and redeeming about them. I mean, you know, a character such as Maddie, who could be like, the top girl, the cheerleader, the very sort of iconic, bitchy American suburban teenager, but she's also on some level, she can be quite nice. You know, she's always good friends to Kate, and she's never makes fun of her for her weight or anything like that. And it's weird, like, none of the characters are just like, this one's the bitch, this one's the kind of cynical arty one, this one's the one that's, having loads of sex. The characters are much more complex than your average, like, teen comedy.
Yeah, I think what was interesting for me is that this season seemed to be a bit more interested in different characters to the last one, apart from the Rue Zendaya character, who obviously is pretty central to the whole thing. And if anything, was more central to this season than she was to the last one. But this season, they seemed a lot more interested in digging into, as you say, like Fezco, Nate, who was a bit of a slightly one-dimensional villain in the first season, but has quite a lot of storyline this year. They seem really determined to humanise Nate if it's the last thing they do.
Yeah.
Which might annoy some people, but at least it was interesting, different material.
Yeah, I mean, again, Nate, I feel, is like the least sympathetic character because he's the jock, the alpha male. He's angry at the world. It's easy to sort of blame him for everything that's gone wrong with America. Angry young men who have everything, but for some reason they're still angry and hate everyone. And they did the thing in the first series when, like, he's quite dislikable. But he's got a bad home life, so that's the deal with his character. But they kind of, again, they made him much more complex in this season. And again, at the end, got him to a sort of likeable place in that at least he got to put one over on his dad, who I suppose is the most dislikable person in the show.
Yeah, I found the long sequences filling in his dad's backstory quite tragic in well, that's definitely still going to go the wrong way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the dad's story is that he's secretly gay and can't accept it because he's like the alpha man's man, the sort of all-American bro. And I've seen this done before, and this at least seemed like a very believable version of that character, and it didn't seem like a cliche. I mean, each of these characters could easily be an archetypal cliche, the arty one, the drug addict, the jock. But they always manage to swerve that in and end up somewhere interesting.
I mean, a lot of it is, writing and performance. I mean, like, Rue's storyline is not the most unique version of the struggling drug addict storyline, but it's well written, and Zendaya's performance is incredibly good, so it pulls it off.
It's not too different to Requiem for a Dream, other than the fact that they're teenagers, but it's Zendaya that makes the character electric.
Yeah, and again, she's still very much central, I guess, because she's, obviously the breakout megastar in this show, and while you've got Zendaya, you may as well use Zendaya. Although, conversely, her love interest, Jules, I felt wasn't actually in it that much this year, which is weird, because I thought she was kind of the other breakout character from this show, but she's got a comparatively small role, especially after about halfway through.
Yeah, I guess they do very much focus on Rue to make it less of an ensemble, but weirdly, as you say, at the expense of Jules, which I don't know if it's the fact that basically, like, we see Jules through Rue a lot more, that the focus is on their relationship rather than Jules as a person. I mean, at the end it does focus on the play, and the play is about events that happened before Jules was on the scene. Jules is one of the core characters in the show that doesn't have an analogue in the play within the show. This is going to get very confusing to anyone who's not seen Euphoria, but anyway, let's go with it. And so I think that's partly to say that, like, it focuses in on this group of friends and their kind of backstory, to which Jules is a later arrival. And I guess there's only so much they could fit in, but yeah, Jules is an interesting character, possibly slightly poorly served by the second series.
I mean, I think a few of the ensemble are. Like, I didn't get the feeling Cassie and Maddie really got a hugely deep storyline this year. They were mostly just accessories to Nate's storyline.
Yeah.
Also, Sydney Sweeney's Cassie gets an uncomfortable amount of nude scenes compared to everyone else. But anyway.
Yeah, I don't know what that was about. Maybe it's dependent on what performers are willing to do or where the writer wants to take the character. The other character was that I thought that Kat had a lot less this season. In the first season, there's the whole plot line of her finding her identity online through, I guess, erotic cam performances. And in this series, she breaks up with her boyfriend because he's too nice. I felt they could have done more with that character, who had an interesting storyline in the first series.
All four of those characters, like, Cassie, Maddie, Jules, and Kat, I think all of them were played down a bit as a general sign of the fact that they were a bit more interested in the crime and the drugs.
Yeah, exactly.
The high school storyline that was being slightly turned down a bit, apart from Lexi's play.
Yeah, and it became more focused on Zendaya's story and crime underline. They also, in terms of the crime, there was also the plot line involving the recording of Jules having sex, which is technically child pornography because she was like 16 when she made it or something. So that, and the fact that the damning implications of that became more of a plot thread in this season. So which I suppose is linking back to this is becoming more of a crime show than a drama. It's less of a Weeds, more of a Breaking Bad.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting if they do a third season, and you could end it at the end of season 2, but it feels like it's being left open. Whether they change the setup and make it a slightly different kind of thing again, or whether this is a direction they're going to continue moving in, we'll find out in 1 to 3 years, I guess.
It's an ambiguous ending. I think they deliberately left it at a way where we could just leave it here. I mean, they finished high school, is what I got was implied by the ending. I don't know, they could do college, they could do these people just hanging around in their hometown post-high school.
Yeah, they've played with the format a lot. They did those 2 specials, which I think we covered one of them on
the first one,
the podcast, which I quite liked. We didn't cover the second one, which I liked a bit less. But yeah, they've shown the willingness to sort of toy with format a bit, so I'd be interested to see what they did if they came back.
Yeah, and there are some characters that are given a definite ending. But then also, there are some plot lines they just left completely unresolved, such as the plot line involving Laurie, the really, really badass drug dealer who's the one in the chain above Fezco, his supplier. She was like terrifying, and there was a plotline involving her that was just stopped and never returned to.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it's almost scarier having her being this thing, this terrifying, if anything, this sort of scary adult world that Rue sort of accidentally stumbles a short way into and then realises quite how horrendous it is and runs away. And there's a part of me that doesn't want to see that explored more, partly because it looks fucking grim, and partly because, I don't know, I feel like it almost takes away from it. But yeah, if they are going further down the crime direction, I imagine there'll be more of that.
Yeah, also it would just turn into Breaking Bad, though, wouldn't it? Serious gangsters doing serious crime.
Well, yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I guess there's ultimately addicts relapse, it does happen, but it depends if they think they've got a new angle on Rue going back into drugs.
Again, they've left it at a point where they could leave it here. Again, if Zendaya becomes way too famous and expensive for them to make any more of this, or just not interested in doing it, they could pick up some of the characters, or they could just kind of wrap it up. It is an ending.
Well, I have just seen the immortal words on Wikipedia. In February 2022, the series was renewed for a 3rd season, so I guess they're doing that.
Oh, fair enough then. Well, probably should have looked that up before I said that.
Well, yeah, to be fair, I've just done a whole bit as well. So yeah, apparently there will be more Euphoria, and we'll see how teeny it is or how climby it is, or maybe they'll move into a 3rd genre. I don't know what genre.
Sci-fi.
Yeah, obviously. Rue gets superpowers, takes the wrong drug.
But what I do like about this show is that it's sort of a weird, like, ugly, distorted mirror held up to the world, in that, like, you know, the angry people are just totally poisoned by their anger, and the regretful people are just totally, you know, annihilated by their hang-ups. And suburban life is just depicted as this kind of thing that's just, like, utterly devoid of meaning, and is just so, you know, utterly soul-destroying and artificial. You know, I guess it's almost a bit like punk in... First of all, it's this sort of anger at conformity and the kind of boringness of regular life and the superficiality of it, but also the fact that it's just this sort of ugly, distorted version of the world. I kind of really dig that. You know, the kind of sex and violence is just sort of this product of the fact that, like, underneath American society, it's basically just rotten, is the sort of thing they're trying to say. And I do think there's something quite powerful, like, in that, and it kind of shows how all the characters are kind of unpleasant on some level, and it is a dark reflection of the dark times we live in.
Weirdly, I always felt this message was more pronounced in season 1, but yeah, there's definitely a vague feeling of, I don't know, nihilistic despair you can get from watching too much Euphoria. This vague sense that everything's just awful and spinning slowly down the drain.
Yeah.
Like I say, honestly, I found season 1 more depressing in that way than season 2. Season 2 almost felt like it was trying to be more of a straightforward character drama.
Yeah, and season 2 threw in more of these kind of, like, it's awful, but there's these moments of levity that make life worth living, such as Lexi and Fezco having a sort of quite sweet romance, even though they're from totally opposite sides of the track, or again Rue finding moments of redemption, and slightly positive note it ended on, in fact. So you're right, the first series had more of the kind of life is just this series of lies and disappointment and everyone pretends that there's more meaning to it than that.
Well, yeah, exactly. Like, I've seen people on Twitter saying, I opted not to watch Euphoria because I have young daughters and I'm terrified of the world of horrifying revenge porn that they might be growing up into. And, fair enough, although I do think this show is, as you say, such a massive artifice that it probably isn't really a documentary.
No, exactly. And if anything, there's less sex and drugs teenagers are doing now. It's more, I think, the show's, I feel, trying to reflect how rotten, I guess, American society is under the surface, and this is how it manifests itself. I mean, Sam Levinson did an amazing film called Assassination Nation, which if you've not seen, I'd highly recommend, and it's got a lot of the similar vibe and definitely a lot of the similar kind of arty style to it. And that's more of a sort of straightforward execution of the idea that there's something rotten underneath in America and it just poisons everything, and at any second it can rear up in just horrible acts of violence and sort of destruction. So that kind of nails it better, but this is kind of weaved into this show as well.
Well, but the trouble with writing an ongoing drama, I guess, is inevitably you start to get attachments to the character, and partly because of that, and partly, just to avoid it being an endless one-note dirge. You can't just smack them around forever. You have to eventually include some sort of note of uplift or grace. I mean, even if it is just so you can make things worse later. I mean, maybe everyone who was in a good place by the end of Season 2 will be wallowing in shit by the middle of Season 3. I don't know. But
true.
We'll see. We'll see in however many years when it comes back.
Yeah, exactly. But I know I've seen some people saying that, like, the hot take that we've got good vibes for dark times. People like Good Place, Parks and Rec, Ted Lasso. In contrast that to during the relatively upbeat and buoyant aughts, we had like dark and gritty Batman and dark and gritty Daniel Craig's Bond. And I can get the point that people during these scary and depressing times want some levity in their culture. But I also think there's really is a place for dark TV in dark times, and I really like that about Euphoria. And I suppose that also relates to the Batman as well. The dark moodiness and bleakness does suit the times that we are living in.
Yeah, although, much like Season 2 of Euphoria, I mean, mild spoilers, I guess, if you consider vague notes about tone a spoiler. But even the Batman ends in a vague place of looking up towards the light rather than just, it's all shit. The soul of the city is fucked.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, we did it, as we said.
We
descend into the darkness, but we did emerge on the other side with some vague notes of positive optimism.
Yeah, quick, let's end the review before something else bad happens.
That's all we have time for. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please leave us a review in your podcatcher of choice so that others can find out about the show. If you want more from us, then you can visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces from Nick and myself.
And if you want still more up-to-the-minute updates, then you can go to MFV Podcast on Twitter or Moderate Fantasy Violence on Facebook, where you can follow us for the latest news, such as we watched a TV show and the next episode is delayed. And if you want to see what I personally am doing, you can go to my Twitter at NickMB or my website at nickbryan.com. If you go there anywhere in the month after this episode comes out, the main thing I'll be doing is plugging my new Kickstarter for Death of a Necromancer, my new comic. Well, actually, it's a whole graphic novel with Robert Ahmed, who did And It Snowed the other year, along with colorist David Cooper and letterer DC Hopkins, about small-town necromancy in a small provincial English town. Yep, it's good fun, goth, Tim Burton, rural fantasy stuff, lots of enjoyable deaths, lots of chickens being murdered. It's a good time. So yeah, if you fancy that, then please come and back us. The link will, I'm sure, be in the show notes, or it will be splattered all over both my timeline and probably also the podcast one. Thank you.
And if you want anything more from me, you can find me on Twitter, where I'm at AlistairJRBall, or you can get more of my writing at redtrainblog.com. Join us next time in the podcast, when we will be embracing our wild side in Turning Red, and then getting up to some violence in The Boys Presents Diabolical. Join us in 2 weeks' time for that. Until then, have a good one, and goodbye.
Bye. Or whatever fucking noise I normally play at this point, I can't remember.
That's all, folks.